We've made plenty of videos about ancient inventions, but some of you commented, why haven't we made a video about the most ancient AC systems? After researching more about this subject, we realized that this subject deserves its own video. But to learn more, we have to go to the city of Yazd in central Iran. The city of Yazd is also known as the city of wind catchers, but it also does have many other famous things like the Kanat or the Yakhchal, which are ancient freezers. It was with the help of these ancient inventions that allowed the people of Yazd to live in a desert like this without any trouble. Yazd is the driest main city of Iran, and its rainfall is less than 50 millimeters per year. The technology of wind catchers has always started from here, and it has made its way all the way to Egypt. But the way the people of Yazd built these things throughout the year is very unique, and it has a very iconic design, so you don't mistake it for another one. The engineers that built these wind catchers built it based on the location, and it always had something to do with where the wind direction is heading. So if the wind is heading one direction all the time and it doesn't change whatsoever, the engineers faced that entrance towards that direction, so it doesn't need any other facing ones. But if it comes from all directions or two directions, they face it to whatever that is. But most of them have all directions, so whichever the wind is coming, they can absorb all that cold air. You might say the wind is going to enter from one side and leave the other, but no, this is where they have closing doors. If the wind is coming from, let's say, the north side, they close the south side and let the wind come in. In Yazd, you have circular wind catchers, but they don't work as well as the square ones. The way the wind hits the walls of the circular one is not as efficient as straight on edges. Back in the day, whoever lived here and they had the funds, they would build the wind catcher as high as possible. Not only does this allow you to get even more cold air inside the building, but it also brings in less dust, which is even more important. So you might think the shorter wind catchers would bring the dust inside, but this wasn't the case, because the earliest known filters inside the building were made by the people in Yazd. In this area, since it's a desert, there's a lot of storms, so the chance of a dust cloud forming inside your building is very high. So any wind catcher, the tall ones or the short ones, always had a filtration system. One type of filtration system, at the entrance of the wind, they would plant something, like a tree or some different types of plants, and that not only would cool the air even more, but it would catch the dust and not let it in. But if there weren't no plants, they could have built a dip down there, or a tiny pool that catches the dust instead of going in. But the tiny pool is probably the best one because it cools it even more. In some areas there was more dust than the other, but they had a method for that as well. They had one of the coolest filtration systems back in the day. It was basically a damped cloth hang in the entrance. Then again, that made the air even cooler, but it also caught the dust from going inside the building. You might ask, what did they do in the winter? They had doors that blocked the air from coming in, because if they didn't, everybody would freeze. During the summer month, they could have completely shut the doors as well. It's not like they had to leave them open. The way the wind catcher was designed always had something to do with how the building was completely laid out. Any room that they wanted ventilation and cold air, they would reach a channel there. And the cool part is that you could have shot everything except one bedroom. Let's say you were having a party in the living room, so you would make all the cold wind go to that area. Just like everything in life, throughout history, the more money you have, the easier your life was. Anyone that had more money, they would have a badass setup. They would have a wind catcher that was very high, and also at the bottom of the basement, they would build a well filled with water. So when the wind comes inside, it first goes to the basement, gets that cold air that's inside the well, then come up to the building. So it's bringing up the coldest air possible. But let's get to the more specific things. Any building or house that has a wind catcher needs to have two wind catchers. One that lets the wind in, and one is the exit, or the inlet and the outlet. The simple explanation is that the cold wind blows inside from the entrance, goes inside the building, and pushes out the hot air that's trapped inside the building from the exit hole. So it's basically pushing hot air out rather than bringing in cold air, if that makes any sense. And this is when you get a very organized circulation. This is an amazing system because in a place where the average temperature during the summer is 50 degrees Celsius, it's amazing that you can have a cool house without using a single watt of energy. This is all happening without any electricity. Some important buildings were even connected to the Kanat, which was an underground canal that had fresh water in it. That means the hot air would enter the shaft that went into the Kanat and enter the building and then leave from the wind tower. This system is kind of like a chimney. Since the wind tower is so high, it's basically creating a suction around the access shaft. So instead of just leaving it there, it's actually sucking in the hot air to cool it off. You might have seen this, but in the winter or fall, sometimes it's colder inside the house rather than outside. This was another method they would have used in the ancient times of Yazd to refresh the air inside the house during the winter and fall months. It basically does the opposite thing it used to do. Instead of bringing in cold air to push the warm air out, it would have brought warm air to push the cold air out. So it's not as effective as a heater or the cold air that would come during the summer times, but it does something and refresh the area. The idea of wind catcher is still alive and well today because after 5,000 years, it has entered modern buildings. Like for example, the University of Doha has these wind catchers that are more modernized, but they still have that traditional look to them. This is an amazing idea without using any electricity. You're letting fresh air and cool air inside the building. It is amazing because modern engineers are looking for any type of excuse to use these things on top of buildings. But the location matters a lot because you can't just put it anywhere like Western Europe because it doesn't make sense. But if you go to a hot and dry climate, it makes very much sense. You have very dry climate that gets hot. And even if the electricity goes out during the summertime, you're not gonna burn to death and you're gonna get cooled off. Speaking of warm and hot places, you have Melbourne, Australia that made this building called the Council House 2. Even though the design is very modern, but the idea is still the same. You're letting out fresh air into the building to cut the energy bill down. This building was designed just for that, where the front end opens up and pushes the hot air outside instead of letting an AC do all that work. And just like we said, Melbourne is a warm place, so it deserves to have something like this.